Hello, everyone, and welcome to our sermon for this weekend of the end of March. We are working our way through the lectionary assignments on what I will simply call our pathway to the Passover that Jesus presents himself for sacrifice. On this particular day, we're dealing with one of the 7 miracles that John gives us in his gospel account to show that Jesus is indeed the Messiah. I think it's a very appropriate miracle for us to be discussing today because we're going to be seeing the story of Lazarus and his being called back to life by Jesus, which is a spectacular miracle that he performs shortly before his own miracle of death and resurrection. And so we're going to go to the book of John, chapter 11. And as we launch our way into this, allow me to disappear for a moment. And let's just start by looking at the sermon title for today, which hopefully we should be able to see together. Lazarus comes to life. This weekend of March 28, 29. This is the story where we find Jesus dealing with a family that he loves very much, and it's a story that I have told at every memorial or every funeral that I've conducted for the last several years. And every time I do, it speaks to those who are in attendance, and 1 or 2 people will actually talk to me after the memorial service as we gather for lunch in the fellowship hall, and they'll make a remark about the fact that they had never seen Lazarus and his story. Perhaps they'd never heard it before, or they'd never heard it explained before, but somehow or other it speaks to them directly. I hope it speaks to you today because it's powerful. We find Jesus in the north, where he is avoiding the Pharisees and those who want to put him to death down in Jerusalem in the area of Judea, and he is busy performing miracles, healing the sick, raising the dead, teaching powerfully. And in a very short time, we would see Jesus traveling from the north down to Jerusalem to the temple area, where he will confront the establishment and deliver himself up for death. But right now he's in the north, and it tells us a man named Lazarus is sick. He is from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And of course, Bethany is just a couple of miles over the hill. You leave probably through the Golden Gate, heading east, up over the Mount of Olives, head due east as if you're going to Jericho, and you come to the village of Bethany. And it tells us this Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, is the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the scene is set, and we find that there is sickness in the family. And this is obviously a family Jesus is close to. And the sisters send word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick, which is a way of saying, look, your very best friend, Lazarus, is sick. Outside of the disciples, who's better to, who do you have more affection for? Who do you care more about? Who cares more about you than Lazarus? You stay at our house on a regular basis. We cook for you. You've even been known to kibbutz with us. Remember that time when you were here and everybody's gathered around you and Martha's off in the kitchen and she complains? What do you say? Martha, Martha, get out of the kitchen and come and choose to listen to the words of life. We're that close. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, that might sound a little bit cavalier, and I should say, this is, the appeal has been made. The women are concerned. If anything happens to our brother, we're going to be vulnerable. And so this is a serious business. We don't want to be left alone in the world without a man in the house. These are tough times. And Jesus' response is rather interesting. He says, no, it's not going to end in death. So the only point of this is God's glory shall be glorified through me. Now, does this mean that God micromanages everybody's sickness? Does it mean that God struck Lazarus for the specific purpose of setting Jesus up to do a miracle? And I'm going to answer that by the word no. I believe that we live in a world that does present us with time and chance. God does not micromanage your life any more than he does mine. Uh, I believe that there have been occasions when he has spared my life where, due to my own stupidity or my own recklessness or my own uh, lack of attention or lack of ability to manage a traffic situation, I could have brought my own life to a conclusion. I also believe that God has answered prayers in my own family. There was a time when my youngest son was born where my wife had to pray, just give me life so that I may raise this child. And she had enough life to live that she was able to raise the child. But eventually her life came to a conclusion. God answered a prayer for her. He answered a prayer for me. But he did not cause the sickness, the illness, the crisis that could have taken her life any more than he caused the traffic accident that could have taken my life on that winter evening in February of 1979. And so I hope you understand that Lazarus is not smitten at this point by God to set up Jesus so he can work a miracle. But he is smitten. He lives in a broken world. He lives subject to all sorts of stresses and strains. And Jesus says, no, this sickness won't end in death. He'll explain that later. And all the circumstances of your life, whatever you may consider the ashes, the tragedy, the wreckage of your life, eventually God will use to glorify the Son of God, Jesus. And only when we can approach that and realize that in all tragedy, in all setbacks, in all trials and tribulations, the reason for the journey through each and every one of these circumstances is to come to know and to understand the love of God, the grace of God, the mercy of God, the power of God, the purpose of God. That's what a Christian has to see from the outset. And this is what Jesus says in this one brief statement. Do his disciples understand it? Well, at this point in their life, the answer would be no. Now, Jesus loves loves Martha and her sister, and Lazarus. So when he hears that Lazarus is sick, he now stays where he was for 2 more days. And then he turns to his disciples and says, let us go back to Judea. They'd been avoiding Judea because the people of Judea were quite on the edge, and the leadership that lives in Judea, specifically in Jerusalem, is out to get him, whatever the circumstances. And so he delays for a couple of days and then announces, I will go. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed. He very specifically and strategically plans the next few days. His agenda includes them, and he delays 2 days for their sake. So, first of all, what we're being told in this little section is Jesus loves them, so he stays away for 2 days. Now, that doesn't make sense to you or to me. It didn't make sense to his disciples at that time, but in retrospect, we see why he makes his decision. And now after 2 days, he says, let's go back to Judea. Well, we left there because it was kind of hostile country, wasn't it? And Jesus is essentially saying, yeah, I know, but I have my reasons, I have my purpose in mind. But Rabbi, they protest, a short while ago the Jews had tried to stone you. And that you're going back. And his response is kind of enigmatic to us because we're removed 2,000 years from this type of discussion, and we don't necessarily understand every nuance. I'm sure if we drop the disciples into the 20th century and they looked around on a rainy day and say, whoa, this is a bit much. And we said to them, don't worry, it's raining cats and dogs, but, it's raining cats and dogs. What on earth do you foolish people mean by that? And so we look back 2,000 years and say, what does he mean when he says, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. And what he is saying in simple terms to them, I know what I'm doing. I see where I'm going. I'm on top of this. And of course, then he further explains to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him. I know what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing it. They don't catch the drift yet, because they reply, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought that he meant natural sleep. So now he tells them plainly, look, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let's go to him. So once again, he's now dead, and I let him die for you. Why? Because I'm going to go there, and I'm going to wake him up. I'm going to raise him from the dead, and this will give you, hopefully, a little more understanding, a little more substance in which to place your faith, so that you can get by the next couple of months, because the next couple of months are going to be tough. You're going to see me die, and you're going to think it's all over. Then you're going to see me rise from the dead, and you won't know how to cope with that either. And then you're going to have 50 days until Pentecost comes, when the Holy Spirit will come, not just to give you a little enlightenment in your mind, but also to empower you to live within you. And so you need far more reinforcement for your faith. Now, 2,000 years later, we aren't quite as challenged as they were. We can look back on 2,000 years of history. And when we talk about faith, the question is, well, what do we mean? A lot of people believe that faith is sort of just positive thinking. For a Christian, faith is not positive thinking. For a Christian, faith is placing their vision on the substance of Jesus. As the author says in Hebrews, we see Jesus. And so if you see Jesus and you understand him, you know where he is, you know what he's doing, and you have 2,000 years of history to reflect upon, then you aren't just walking in, quote, blind faith. You are walking, placing your confidence in the one who's gone before you, the one who you see, you know, you understand. In the same way that you place your faith in the sun, it'll come up tomorrow. Why? Because it's been coming up all your life. In the same way you place confidence in your house. I'm sitting in a house right now, and I have confidence the walls are not going to collapse in on me. I have faith. That faith is based on a substantive experience that's gone on for quite a few years. Every morning I get up and the walls are still standing. Every time I bang up against them, I hurt, they don't. Every time I leave and I slam the front door, the walls don't collapse. Every time I come home, and the walls are still standing. Why? Because the place has been built on the foundation of concrete, and with all the codes followed, and it's a pretty decent house. And by the way, it's going to be for sale in a few years' time, so if you're interested, I'll just put that commercial in right now. But you get my point. Your faith has a focus. It has an object. It is not just positive thinking. And so Jesus is saying you need faith, and you don't have a lot to put it in. Oh yeah, you see me heal the sick, raise the dead, and everything else. But you need to have a powerful miracle here shortly before I submit myself to death, just to give you something to go on. And so it is, look, I'm glad I wasn't there, and for your sake I have delayed this long enough for Lazarus to die. And now I'm going to go there and raise him to life for your sake as well. And so we begin to understand that there's something happening here that's far more than just Jesus being slow to respond. Thomas, also known as Didymus, says to the rest of the disciples, let's also go that we may die with him. Meaning, okay, he's going to go back down there. He's going to face the mob. He's going to face the angry leadership. It's all right. He knows what he's doing, I suppose, but we're just going to have to go. We're just going to have to follow. There's a sort of sense of resignation here. There's maybe even a little humor from our point of view. There's a confession of humanity. This is Thomas on behalf of all of the disciples saying, oy vey, here we go. What's going to happen now? We don't know, but we don't have any alternative but to follow him. He always manages to do something that surprises us, so we will just follow. The scene now shifts to Bethany. Several more days have passed, and it tells us that Jesus, having walked at least 3 days south, on his arrival finds that Lazarus has already been in the tomb now for 4 days. So if we give him this is 5 days, because Jesus, after he receives the word, now has delayed for a couple of days, and now it's probably 2 to 3 days to walk all that way south. And so Lazarus died. He has been prepared for burial. Within 24 hours, probably, he has been buried, and now the wake continues. And he's been in the tomb, it tells us, for 4 days. Now, that's not a really important fact. When you're dead, you're dead. And Lazarus is just lost to them. And he walks into the middle of their grief. And it tells us Bethany is less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. And quite a few Jews have come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. And once again, I remind you, for 2 women to be left alone, it's kind of touch and go as to whether or not they're entitled to own property. It's kind of awkward that, well, who protects them? Because they're Roman occupying soldiers. Who protects them? Because, well, I was watching a short excerpt from a documentary here a little while ago about women now being allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia. And the biggest driving school in the world with 700 instructors and over 250 cars for them to use, presumably every hour of the day and night, is available to Saudi women. And you imagine, in a sophisticated society where, well, money is no object, and you have the incredible spectacle of women who are not allowed to drive, and they're not allowed to own much in the way of property. In fact, they're not allowed to, until recently, leave their residence without being accompanied by a husband, a father, a brother, a cousin, a son, somebody. Now, put that particular scenario into play, hit it up a few more notches, and you've got the situation for Martha and Mary. And so the loss of a brother is traumatic. It is just putting them into a very difficult position. And so when the Jews come to comfort them from Jerusalem, you can understand why. And when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. But Mary stayed at home. Now, Martha is the pragmatic one. And the pragmatic approach is, well, I'll go out and meet him. He's on his way. Somebody's come ahead. And I guess I should be sort of doing my thing. And so she goes out. Mary, on the other hand, is surrounded by people. She stays. She's a little more, perhaps, an emotional individual. Martha's more pragmatic. Martha was the one who stayed in the kitchen making food, you recall. Mary was the one just sitting there gazing into Jesus' eyes, hanging on every word. So you have this contrast between the two sisters. And Martha comes out to meet Jesus, doing the practical thing. I must meet the rabbi who has come to visit us, and perhaps have a substantive conversation. And she says to Jesus, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus deflects just a little by saying, well, your brother will rise again. Now, at this point, she doesn't really, she's not in a place to argue with him. She's given him a little bit of a guilt trip and pointed out to him that, well, if you've been here, and I don't know what you can do now, but I've heard that you have raised people from the dead. And Jesus says, well, he will rise again. And she answered, well, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection of the last day. And she gives the theologically correct answer. It's the understanding of the Jews dating all the way back to Job's time, that there will come a day when somebody, the creator of heaven and earth, Jehovah God, the God of the covenant, somehow or other will call, and we will answer him from our graves. And Jesus says to her, all right, you're looking ahead to the resurrection. I'm going to point out to you, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Well, wait a second. Lazarus believed in you and he's dead. How does that work out? Do you believe this? He poses the question to her. Now he's expanding the conversation. And her response is, yes, Lord, I believe that you're the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. I believe you. I accept that you're the Messiah, but I'm not sure what it means. I have the starting point, but how does that work out? After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, and he's asking for you. So there's a little more to this conversation than we have reported here. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. She's been preoccupied with all those who are surrounding her. They're comforting her. She's comforting them. She's involved in the moment. But now she is called through her pragmatic sister, who says, okay, he's here. You better go out and meet him. In fact, he asks for you specifically. Now, Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, that they followed her, supposing she was going to the grave to mourn there. Now, as this group moves out of the house and follows her, they're going to come to the approximate area of the tomb, and they're going to meet Jesus. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Now, that tells you that Jesus is feeling the moment. He is not distant. Okay, he hasn't been around. He's delayed for 4 days. Does that mean he's cold to the situation? Does it mean that he is not emotionally involved in this? Well, according to this, he is deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And his response is, where have you laid him? Well, come and see, Lord, they replied. Come and see. At this point, it simply records the fact Jesus wept. 2 very simple, short words. In fact, this is the shortest verse in the Bible. Identify it, John 11:35. Please take note. It'll be on the test later. I'm just teasing you. There's no test. But there is a test in all of this. We'll get to that in a little while. Jesus wept. Take note of that, because he's not just troubled, he is involved. And he's not involved just in the emotional sense. You see the response of those who are, obviously, if they're friends of Mary and Martha, if they are friends to Lazarus, chances are the majority of them are also impressed with Jesus. They know that the Pharisees are out to get him. They know that there's not a lot of sentiment in some quarters, but they've come out to comfort Jesus' friends. But it tells us the Jews say, well, see how he loved him. But some of them said, well, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? So where was he in the hour of need? Where was he? And why didn't he show up? When we showed up, we got here before him. Where was he? He came 4 days too late. And Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. And Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And so he is still having that discussion with Martha. And from her point of view, it's way too late, even for you. And there's a bad odor. Now, I don't fully understand what went on here, in as much as anointing the deceased for burial was a practice. Wrapping him in garments was a practice. So one way or another, it is known that despite what we do, there is going to be decay. And it has been 4 days. And so we can't guarantee that there won't be some offense involved here. And again, Jesus, in his conversation, it says that Jesus once more moved, and you know something? I'm looking through my notes and I realize that there's a slide missing. And so I'm going to have to refer to the next verses and simply ask you perhaps to trust me that this isn't the text. It says, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. All right? And that happens to be missing from the notes that I have here. And the reason I'm emphasizing this and pausing for a moment is because when it says Jesus is once more deeply moved, if you were to read that in the King James Version, you would see that it says, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And when Jesus groaned in his spirit, or was deeply moved, if you were to look that up, you would find that there is a certain, the root word is that he is indignant in his spirit. He is looking at the crowd that's gathered around, and he is indignant that they are living in confusion and in blindness and without faith, because they still have not placed their faith in him. In fact, it says when he is moved, he is, as the King James Version says, he is groaned and he is troubled. That word implies that his spirit, like water, is disturbed. It distresses him that people who like him, who maybe love him, it distresses him that people who loved Lazarus can find no comfort and relief and stability in their life. And so he instructs them to take away the stone. Take away the stone. But Lord, said Martha, he's been there for all these days. And so they take away the stone, and he he looks to heaven and says, I thank you that you have heard me, Father. I know that you always hear me, but I'm saying this out loud for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you have sent me. Why did he delay for 4 days? To set up a scenario where they had an opportunity to see him work the miracles of the Father in heaven, and have an opportunity to understand how he is the caring, loving God who is not just gracious, but is emotionally involved with their distress. And so he calls Lazarus forth. And when he has said this, he calls in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And it is at that point, we are told, the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Wow, what an incredible moment. This artist's rendition doesn't do justice to the moment. I simply include this in our notes today because, well, you get the idea. You notice that Lazarus is, unfortunately, in this illustration, bound almost like a mummy from a popular motion picture, bound in grave clothes, like he's almost a zombie. But at least gives us the point that here is Jesus calling him forth, and he steps out bound in grave cloths. And the instruction is, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Wow. Now, at this particular point, I make a few observations. You might say, well, better late than never. But in our lives, typically, Jesus does not rescue us from the stress, the exhaustion of a trial at the moment it comes upon us. Yes, there are times when we receive answers to prayer almost instantaneously. But there are times, like the times we are living through right now, where the answer is, okay, there's a COVID-19 virus going around. Stay in your home. Why? Why can't you just rebuke the virus and give me your child, the one who places my faith in you? Why don't you just give me a pass on this? Why do I have to suffer along with all of the others? Why am I under stress and strain? Why are my children and grandchildren now looking at everything from unemployment to the loss of an educational opportunity because the schools are closed down? Why are we, it seems, in the midst of the worst storm imaginable, right when we are under distress like you would not believe? The Russians and the Saudis decide to get into a great big yelling match over the price of oil. And the price of our Alberta oil, which, let's face it, still is a substantial slice of our economy, has dropped from the good old days when it was well over $100 US a barrel to, it was reported yesterday, $5 a barrel. Now, where is the sense in that? You can't even take it out of the ground for $5 a barrel. You're kind of glad that if it was sold on the futures market, it was probably sold for $25 or $35 or $45 a barrel. So we continue to deliver at that guaranteed price. And we hope that the price of oil doesn't stay at $5 or $6 a barrel. Not even the Russians can get by on $5 a barrel. The Saudis can give it away at that price. But, I mean, that's crazy. That's unprecedented. Even in the worst times back in the 80s, I think it dropped to $11 a barrel. And Syncrude was so distressed at the time, I remember people telling me that they had cut out the free coffee for their employees to save $1 million a year. Uh, this is not just the perfect storm, this is the perfect confluence of a hurricane, a typhoon, an earthquake, and a volcano going off all at the same time. And as you look around you, you say, how will our beloved province of Alberta survive? And yet, we have to. And somehow, we will. But so far, you say, well, I don't see God's hand bringing relief in the midst of all of this. He's not just 4 days late. It feels as though he's 4 months late. In fact, it feels as though he's just not coming at all. And so right now, as we consider this particular story, we ask, if Jesus shows up 4 days late, how do you survive the 4 days? I'm going to say that in this, and I realize this is a very feeble response, and it's a very brief summary, but ask yourself, we are called to focus on Jesus, who is the God of love. And from this simple story, we realize he had a long-range plan leading to everlasting life, which is the first thing he introduces to the minds of Martha and Mary and Lazarus. And he then has to turn to his disciples and say, do you see what I'm about? You and I, with 2,000 years of history behind us, you and I, with the Christian calling and the path that we have followed so far in our lives, have to try hard to see the things from the perspective of the throne room of God. We have to, if you will, helicopter up and look at the big picture. And we have to understand as we look to our God in heaven, which, by the way, is the story of Daniel. When the people of God are in captivity, what is the message of the prophet Daniel? The God of Israel rules in the affairs of men. What is the message of the book of Revelation? It is the God of heaven rules in the affairs of men. Even though you find that your brothers and sisters are being chased and tormented, that you can't hold a job for a while here, and some have even fallen to persecution and found themselves thrown to lions. Even during the midst of that, you go to other apocalyptic literature, the book of Ezekiel, what is the message there to a nation that is in the midst of captivity? And the prophet is taken in vision to a valley of dry bones. You remember that story? And he looks, and not only is life gone from the body, the bones are parched and disconnected. And God poses the question to the prophet Ezekiel, can these bones live again? And Ezekiel says, sort of, well, duh, only you know that. And so God says to Ezekiel, speak to the bones. In other words, speak to the dead nation that's scattered abroad. I will yet revive this nation. And of course, after the 70 years of captivity, many of the Jews return to Jerusalem, rebuild the temple, reconstitute the nation so that there is a nation for Jesus to be born into and a throne for him to inherit from the lineage of King David. And so when you look at literature that is sent to people in distress, the message is always, you have to take the perspective from the throne room of God. Now that's a nice theory, isn't it? That's me being very abstract, very pragmatic, very Martha, perhaps, to you right now. But on a more personal note, we have to speak with the God who dwells on high, moment by moment, day by day. And when you and I are both told, through Paul and others, but specifically through Paul, to make your needs known, to pray in detail about your needs, your children, your grandchildren, your distress, your threat of unemployment, the disruption to your retirement funds, your dislocation as you can't go shopping like you used to, and you're told to stay at home. But in the midst of that, he says, make your needs known with thanksgiving. With thanksgiving. Look at this. We're not. We're told just don't get together right now. Don't come together and expect to be able to have a worship service, because there's a chance that one young person who's healthy and doesn't, maybe they got a sniffly nose, is carrying this rather disruptive and powerful virus. And they could give it to another young person. Well, no big deal. They'll get past it. Who could give it to another older person? Oops. And maybe they'll give it to the pastor, who happens to be old as well and has an underlying condition. What is that underlying condition, you ask? I don't know, but I'm sure there is one right now. And if I catch that virus, I'm not going to bounce back like I would have in my 20s or my teens. I'm going to be smitten, and I'm going to suffer damage to my lungs, and there's a chance I could share it to other older people. And hey, 1 out of 5 or 10 of us just might get sick enough to die, leaving a widow, leaving children fatherless, leaving grandchildren wondering, where did grandpa go? I mean, things could go on. And so, make your needs known, but with thanksgiving. Okay, stay at home, but I have a home. Stay under your roof. Yeah, I have a roof. I can FaceTime with children and grandchildren. I can still go to Costco. I may have to line up and stay 6 to 10 feet apart from the person in front of me. I may have to wait 15 minutes before they let me in, but I can still go into Costco. And my wife and I went there yesterday, and look, we can buy food. We can actually buy tissues and toilet paper and paper towels, although it says, please don't take more than 1 or 2, because we need to share. And so with Thanksgiving, we can go and we can shop for food, and there are people still supplying our needs. So even to my brothers and sisters who hit unemployment, there is unemployment insurance. To those who wonder, well, how are we going to pay the rent and support the kids? There is supplemental income. So don't forget, in the midst of your distress, to offer thanks. Because once you get into the habit of just expressing your regrets, your frustrations, your distress, well, you lose perspective. You sink into self-pity. And then you forget the fact that there is a God in heaven who knows exactly what is happening and why it's happening. And you forget the lesson that you learned at some time or another. That's, well, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And you've gone through trials before. You've been delivered before. In fact, think back 10 years. What trial were you in back then? 10 years ago. At this point, you say to me, well, I don't remember 10 years ago. I don't remember what trial I was going through back then. Exactly. Because it came and it went. And you survived, and you were stronger for it. And this isn't a particularly profound truth. I mean, I've watched Governor Cuomo of New York State wax eloquent on a number of occasions as he's briefed the people in a very distressing circumstances in New York City and in New York State. Hey, we will come through this. Character is forged in adversity. And so even from a human point of view, he is able to argue with people who trust him. Look, we're going to survive this if we take the right steps, do the right things, honor the instructions that we've been given. We will not only come through this and survive, but we will eventually thrive, and we will be better for it. And this is the message Jesus has just given to his disciples, to Mary and to Martha. This is happening for your sake. It's not happening to you. It's happening for you. Oy vey. I didn't look at it that way. Well, yeah, nobody does at first. So this is not me talking down to you or saying, wow, when I saw this coming, I thought, wonderful. Well, when I saw it coming, frankly, I thought, oy vey as well. And I had to think things through. And I had to say to myself, okay, it's raining lemons right now, and some of them are really smelly lemons because they're covered with some other stuff that I really don't like as well. So I had to take and wash off a few lemons and decide to squeeze them. I had to learn to use this particular medium to communicate with my friends, my brothers and my sisters in the congregation. I had to learn a few other things as well. Oy vey, I'm going to be trapped in my own house. I'm going to be locked in my own basement. And as somebody I live with, whom I'm very fond of, said, well, my dear, it's time you were trapped in that basement because it needs to be cleaned. And so, okay, I guess that's one lemon I really didn't want to squeeze, but if I got a little bit of time I wasn't anticipating, maybe I should clean the basement. So, yeah, the basement got cleaned over the last couple of weeks. There's still a lot of stuff that needs to be organized, but clean is good. Organization yet to come. So, God apparently in his will decided that, yeah, it's raining lemons, Bob, but I've given you enough encouragement here, and I've given you enough motivation that you should think in terms of lemonade. All right, so I don't know what you might be wanting to do in your life right now, but there are spiritual lessons to be learned and physical as well. Ask yourself, so what could I be doing? What should I be doing during this unplanned respite? Well, make a to-do list and work through it. You can still FaceTime your grandkids. You can still work on projects that you have been postponing. You can still take a little time for prayer and thanksgiving. That we're always too rushed. I know you didn't anticipate working from home, but if you are working from home, you don't have to drive to some other place, do you? So that maybe saves you 30 minutes or 45 minutes travel time a day. Okay, I'm not just being a Pollyanna here, but I am trying to ask you to just step into this situation with the perspective of Jesus. Try to take the story of Jesus holding off for 4 days to make a powerful point and ask, okay, well, he's holding off 4 days with me right now. How am I going to survive this? What am I supposed to do with those 4 days? Well, as I said, you're also supposed to learn to count your blessings. Count your blessings, especially the blessing of people in your life, especially the blessing of being able to say, Lord, I appreciate what you have given me. I appreciate what I am learning through this trial. I appreciate that I will come through this and be stronger. And not only will I be stronger, but I will also have learned to forge a deeper, more profound bond with you, the one who gives me the breath of life day by day by day, moment by moment by moment, the one who sustains my life. I worry about my children and my grandchildren. I worry about my husband and my wife. I worry about my parents. But you know, you too worry about them. But you don't just worry. You are profoundly moved by their distress, and you are there for them also. And so as we come together today and we think of what we've been experiencing and what we have been living through, let's go back and remind ourselves what the lectionary assignment for this week has been. Look into the life of Jesus and how he cared for people he profoundly loved. And when it says he was moved in his spirit and he was troubled, remember that part of that movement was, in fact, an indignation that there were people who did not understand who he was, why he was there, and why he was there for them. And when you begin to meditate on that, realize that he is still the same yesterday, today, forever. He is still in the same place. He is still operating from the same profoundly deep well of compassion and love that he has for you and for me. And so take this lesson, meditate upon it, perhaps share it with someone that you love today. Perhaps phone up a brother or a sister in your congregation that you haven't seen for several weeks now and encourage them. You know, when it says that Lazarus came out of that tomb, Jesus said to those standing around, take the the cloths off of him, take the linens off of his body. Because number one, we have just talked a great deal about the fact that we have to respond. Lazarus had to walk out of that tomb, didn't he? So Jesus did 99.9%, but he left the last little bit to Lazarus. I've raised you to life, now put one foot in front of the other. Choose to do the things that we have just discussed. Place your confidence in the one who can take a valley of dry bones and resurrect a nation. Place your confidence in the one who says, talk to me, I'm here for you. And remind yourself that he is still the God of compassion, who brings life, not, as he told Martha, in the resurrection at the last day, but in this moment, in the here and now. I am the resurrection and the life. And so, step one, you put one foot in front of the other. Step two, he turns to those standing around and say, now help him. So when I say to you, call somebody up who you haven't talked to for a few weeks. Call your kids, call your grandkids, encourage them. Help them to take those restrictive burial linens off of their body as well. Remind them that they have been called to life in Jesus in the here and the now. Turn to the person that you're maybe sharing this with and remind them, I'm here for you during this trial. Because as the Holy Spirit motivates you to encourage and to strengthen someone else, you too will be encouraged and strengthened by them, the Holy Spirit in them, working through them. So it's an interesting combination. In the here and the now, Jesus has called you and me into resurrection life. Called us to, sometimes we say, live in the love of God. Walk in the way of Jesus in the here and now. But that walking challenges me to put one foot in front of the other. In prayer, in meditation, in reading, in discussion, in gratitude, in thanksgiving. Making little baby choices that contribute to the understanding that I have of resurrection life in the here and now. Like Martha, I might say, well, okay, that comes at the end of the age. That comes when I'm called from the grave and enter into the new heavens, the new earth with a new body. And Jesus' answer is, no, that's here and now. If you believe I am the resurrection and the life, then you enter into it now and you will never die. Oh, I didn't think I was responsible to put one foot in front of the other. Yeah, I'm calling you from the grave. Step out of it. And by the way, I'm calling your brothers and sisters to support you in that. And I'm calling you to become a brother or a sister and to support somebody else in that. And together, let us take off the linens that bind us and continue to walk from the tomb that held us as we enter more deeply into a relationship with Jesus. And let's remember, that's just not an abstract, warm, fuzzy feeling. It is a practical answer to the question that you and I are sharing today. What on earth is going on in Alberta? What on earth is going on in Edmonton? What is this $5 a barrel oil? Unemployment all surrounding us, restricted to my own home? Really? Yes. And it's something that we have to work through together. And as we work through this together, we're going to understand what it means to enjoy the bond of fellowship and the love of the Holy Spirit shared among ourselves. So God bless. Have a good week. And meditate upon this lesson today from the story of Lazarus, who Jesus raised from the grave to teach you and me who he is. God bless.